The water hit like a freight train. 1 second, Jack Parker was setting up his tent in the narrow canyon. The next, a 6-foot wall of muddy chaos slammed into him, ripping, tearing, drowning. The roar was deafening, primal, like standing inside a jet engine filled with rocks and debris. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see. The current threw him against a boulder, ribs screaming, then yanked him back into the churning brown hell. His head broke the surface. One breath, gone again. Stay calm. Assess. Survive. 20 years out of the Marine Corps, and the training still fired like muscle memory. But this wasn't Fallujah. This wasn't a firefight he could maneuver through. This was nature, raw, indifferent, lethal. The flood carried him 200 yards downstream in seconds. His pack gone. His knife gone. His radio, GPS, first aid kit, water filter, all of it ripped away by the Utah desert's most underestimated killer. When the current finally threw him against a sandstone ledge, Jack clawed his way up with bleeding hands. He rolled onto his back, gasping, coughing up muddy water. The sky above the slot canyon was a thin ribbon of darkening blue. The sun was already setting. He took inventory, soaked clothing, a gash above his left eyebrow leaking blood into his eye, possible fractured ribs on his right side, and exactly 0 gear. Not even a lighter. The temperature would drop to 40 degrees tonight, maybe lower. Jack stood slowly, every breath a knife in his side. He looked downstream where the flash flood still raged, then upstream where his campsite had been. Preparation is a mindset. Survival is a tactic. This is Expert Survival Guide. And Jack Parker had just entered the fight of his life, alone, injured, and deep in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Jack Parker wasn't supposed to be here. At 52 years old, the former Marine Force recon operator had traded his tactical gear for hiking boots, his fire team for solitude. After 2 decades of service, 3 deployments, countless missions he'd never talk about, Jack had earned his peace, and he found it in the backcountry. This was supposed to be a simple 3-day solo trip through Utah's San Rafael Swell, a place where red rock canyons carved by ancient rivers created corridors of silence and beauty. He'd done this route twice before. Checked the weather forecast. Clear skies, 0 precipitation. Standard precautions. Standard gear. But the desert doesn't care about forecasts. 15 miles upstream, a sudden monsoon cell, the kind that appears out of nowhere in late summer, had dumped 2 inches of rain in 20 minutes. Jack never saw the storm, never heard it coming. By the time the wall of water funneled through the narrow slot canyon, there was no warning, no time, just impact. Now, standing on a sandstone ledge with the sun disappearing and his body going into shock, Jack had to shift mindsets. This wasn't a hike anymore. This was a survival situation. And every decision in the next 72 hours would determine whether he walked out of this canyon or became another statistic, another name on a search and rescue report filed too late. The mission was simple. Survive the night. Treat his injuries. Navigate out. But simple doesn't mean easy. Before we continue, drop your city or state in the comments below. Let's see where the Expert Survival Guide community is watching from. Are you in the mountains, the desert, urban terrain? Let me know right now. Now, let's break down how Jack Parker turned a catastrophic situation into a tactical problem he could solve. Jack's hands were shaking, not from fear, from the early stages of shock. His body temperature had dropped 3 degrees in minutes. The adrenaline dump from the near drowning was fading, and his nervous system was starting to realize the extent of the damage. This was the danger zone, the window where people make fatal mistakes. Stop. Breathe. Think. He'd heard those words from his SEER instructor at Camp Lejeune 28 years ago. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape training. The military's way of preparing you for the absolute worst. And the first lesson was always the same. Control your mind, or your mind will kill you. Jack forced himself to take 3 deep breaths, slow, controlled, Tactical breathing. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds hold. 4 seconds out. His heart rate began to drop from 140 to something approaching functional. He looked around. He was on a ledge about 8 feet above the current water level, tucked into an alcove where the sandstone had eroded into a shallow cave. The flood was still raging below him, a churning mass of brown water, uprooted vegetation, and debris. The sound was constant, oppressive. The canyon walls rose 300 feet on both sides. Sheer. No obvious way up. Downstream, the canyon twisted out of sight. Upstream, same story. He was in a slot. A beautiful, deadly trap. Assessment first. Action second. Immediate threats. Hypothermia. Wet clothing. Dropping temperature. No heat source. Bleeding. Head laceration. Possible internal injuries. Dehydration. Ironic. Surrounded by water he couldn't drink. Exposure. Night approaching. No shelter materials. Jack started the mental checklist every operator learns. Personnel. Solo. No backup. No one expecting him for 3 days. Equipment. None. Completely stripped. Time. Approximately 40 minutes until sunset. Then 8 hours of darkness at 40 degrees, possibly lower. Terrain. Slot Canyon. Flash flood zone. Limited mobility options. Situation. Critical. He touched his ribs gently. The pain was sharp, but localized. Probably cracked, not broken. If they were broken, he'd be coughing blood. Still, every breath hurt. The head wound was still bleeding, but sluggishly. Not arterial. The blood was mixing with the muddy water on his face. First priority. Stop the bleeding. Second priority. Get warm. Let me pause the story here and break down what Jack just did, because this is textbook field trauma assessment, and it could save your life. The March Protocol. When you're injured and alone, you follow March. Massive hemorrhage. Control any arterial bleeding first. Jack checked for spurting blood, found none. His head wound was venous, steady flow, but not life-threatening in the short term. Hey, airway. Make sure you can breathe. Jack's airway was clear, no water in his lungs after coughing it out, no obstructions. Respiration. Check for chest injuries that could collapse along. His ribs hurt, but he was breathing symmetrically. No sucking chest wound. Circulation. Look for signs of shock, pale skin, rapid pulse, confusion. Jack caught this early with his shaking hands and controlled it with tactical breathing. Hypothermia. Head injury. In wilderness survival, these get added to combat protocols. Jack identified both as immediate threats. The key: you have to force yourself to slow down and systematically check. Panic makes you miss the injury that kills you 3 hours later. If you're in a survival situation, stop moving. Take 3 tactical breaths. Run march on yourself. Only then start planning your next move. Now, back to Jack's situation. Jack needed to stop the head bleeding without medical supplies. He reached up and felt the gash, about 2 inches long, above his left eyebrow. Not deep enough to see bone, but deep enough to need closure. In his pack, he'd had a fully stocked IFAK, individual first aid kit, gauze, Israeli bandages, quick clot, medical tape, standard loadout for anyone serious about backcountry travel. Now, he had wet clothes and bloody hands. He looked down at his shirt, a synthetic hiking shirt, soaked through, useless for warmth, but the fabric could work. He grabbed the bottom hem and tried to tear it. The wet synthetic stretched, but wouldn't rip. Think. Improvise. Jack looked around the alcove. Sandstone, smooth and ancient. But in the corner, a piece of driftwood, probably left from a previous flood, wedged in a crack. He grabbed it, snapped off a piece with a sharp edge, and used it to saw at his shirt hem. After 30 seconds of effort, he had a strip of fabric about 2 inches wide. He folded it into a makeshift bandage and pressed it against his forehead, then tied it around his head using another strip. The pressure would slow the bleeding. It wasn't sterile. Nothing out here was. But infection was a tomorrow problem. Bleeding out was a today problem. Priorities. Next, warmth. Hypothermia kills faster than almost anything in the wilderness. Jack knew the rule of threes. 3 minutes without air. 3 hours without shelter in harsh conditions. 3 days without water. 3 weeks without food. He had maybe 90 minutes before his core temperature dropped into dangerous territory. The wet clothes were pulling heat from his body through evaporative cooling and conduction. He needed to get dry, or at least reduce heat loss. Jack started stripping. Boots first. He unlaced them and dumped out a pint of muddy water from each one. His socks were useless, soaked through. He wrung them out as much as possible and laid them on a flat rock. The boots he kept on. Barefoot on sandstone would shred his feet, and mobility was survival. His pants came next. He wrung out the cargo pants, twisting them like a towel until no more water came out. They were still damp, but significantly lighter. He put them back on. The shirt got the same treatment. It wasn't ideal. He was still wet, but he'd reduced the water content by maybe 60%, which meant 60% less evaporative cooling. Now he needed to address the shelter problem before the sun disappeared completely. Jack scanned the alcove again, this time looking for resources. The driftwood pile had more pieces, nothing large, but enough to work with. There were also desert plants that had washed down, dead juniper branches, dried grasses, sage. Fire would be ideal, but fire requires ignition. No lighter, no matches, no ferro rod, no batteries and steel wool, no magnifying glass. He could try a bow drill, friction fire. Jack had done it in training, even done it a few times on camping trips to prove he could. But it required dry wood, cordage, and about 30 minutes of sustained effort. His wood was damp. He had no cordage, and with possible cracked ribs, the repetitive motion might be impossible. Shelter first. Fire is secondary. Jack started gathering the driftwood and stacking it at the back of the alcove, creating a windbreak. The canyon was acting like a chimney. Air flowing through it would pull heat away from his body all night. He needed to create a microclimate. He built a low wall about 3 feet high using the larger driftwood pieces, wedging them between rocks. Behind it, he piled the dried grasses and smaller branches, not for burning, but for insulation. He would lay on top of that instead of directly on the cold sandstone. As he worked, the sun finally dropped below the canyon rim. The light shifted from gold to gray in seconds. Temperature dropped noticeably. He could see his breath now. Jack crawled into his improvised shelter, pulling the remaining grasses over himself like a blanket. It wasn't much. In a perfect world, he'd have a bivy sack, a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, maybe a small tarp. But perfect was gone. This was survival. He lay on his right side to keep pressure off his injured ribs, pulled his knees to his chest to conserve heat, and tucked his hands into his armpits. Then the shivering started. The shivering was violent, his whole body convulsing in waves. Jack knew what this meant. His core temperature was dropping below 95 degrees. Stage 1 hypothermia. If it progressed to Stage 2, he'd lose fine motor control. Stage 3, he'd stop shivering altogether, and that's when you die. But there was something else. A sound. Above the constant roar of the flood below, Jack heard something moving upstream. Not water. Something else. Footsteps. Rockfall. He lay perfectly still, listening. There it was again. Closer this time. And then he saw it. A shape moving along the opposite canyon wall, about 50 feet up. Dark. Four-legged. Mountain lion. The big cat paused, silhouetted against the darkening sky, and turned its head toward Jack's alcove. Chapter 2. When Nature Becomes the Enemy. Night 1. 2100 hours. Jack's body went still. Not a conscious decision, pure instinct. The same hardwired response that kept his ancestors alive 50,000 years ago. When a predator looks at you, you become stone. The mountain lion was big, even at 50 feet and in failing light. Jack could tell this was a mature male, probably 160 pounds of muscle, fang, and claw. The cat moved along the canyon wall with impossible grace, paws finding holds on near-vertical sandstone that would break a human's neck. It stopped, turned its head fully toward Jack's position. Can it see me? Can it smell me? The blood. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but his makeshift bandage was soaked. And Jack had been sweating, stress, exertion, adrenaline. In the confined space of a slot canyon, scent pooled and concentrated. The lion's ears rotated forward. Locked on. Jack's hand moved slowly to the driftwood pile beside him, fingers closing around a branch about 3 feet long. Not much of a weapon against 200 pounds of apex predator, but better than nothing. Don't run. Don't show fear. Don't look like prey. That was the rule with big cats. Mountain lions were ambush hunters. They wanted prey that ran, that showed weakness, that triggered the chase instinct. A healthy adult human who stood their ground and fought back wasn't worth the energy or risk. But Jack wasn't standing. He was lying down, partially concealed, injured and bleeding. I look exactly like prey. The cat began descending, not rushing, just moving with that patient, fluid certainty that predators have when they've already decided your food. It picked its way down the canyon wall, dropping from ledge to ledge, closing the distance. 30 feet. Jack sat up slowly, keeping his eyes on the lion. Pain shot through his ribs. He suppressed the grunt. He needed to make himself big, threatening. 20 feet. He stood, raising the driftwood branch above his head with both hands. Every movement was agony, but he forced his voice out. Get back. Go on. Get. The shout echoed in the canyon. The lion paused. For 5 seconds, neither moved. Then the cat's tail twitched, that distinctive flick that every feline does before it pounces. Here it comes. Stop. Let's talk about what Jack's facing and how you handle this if it happens to you. Mountain lion encounter protocol. Mountain lions kill about 2 people per year in North America, but attacks are increasing as humans push into their territory. Here's what you need to know. If you see a mountain lion, stop moving. Don't run. Running triggers chase instinct. You cannot outrun a cat that hits 40 miles per hour in short bursts. Make yourself large. Raise your arms. Open your jacket. If you have a pack, hold it above your head. You want to look too big to be worth attacking. Maintain eye contact. Unlike bears, you do not avert your gaze. Stare directly at the cat. Predators interpret this as, I see you, and I'm ready to fight. Back away slowly. Create distance, but never turn your back. Face the threat. Be loud. Shout. Yell. Make yourself seem aggressive and unpredictable. If it attacks, fight. Use anything. Rocks, sticks, bare hands. Target the eyes and nose. Mountain lions are ambush hunters, not brawlers. If you fight hard, most will disengage. Jack's specific problem. He's injured, confined in a canyon with limited mobility, and showing weakness. The normal make yourself big and back away protocol doesn't fully apply. He has to convince this lion he's too dangerous to mess with. Now, let's see if he survives the next 30 seconds. The mountain lion's muscles coiled. Jack did something his seer instructors would have called tactically insane. He charged. 3 steps forward, roaring like he'd lost his mind, swinging the driftwood branch in a wide arc. The movement tore something in his ribs, white-hot pain, but he kept coming, yelling incoherently, making himself the aggressor. The lion's ears flattened. Its eyes widened, and it bolted. The cat scrambled backward up the canyon wall, claws scraping sandstone, moving twice as fast as it had descended. Within seconds it was back on the upper ledge, then disappearing over the rim into the darkness. Jack stood there, gasping, the branch still raised. His ribs were screaming. Black spots danced in his vision. Don't pass out. Don't you dare pass out. He staggered back to the alcove and collapsed against the driftwood windbreak, sliding down until he was sitting. His hands were shaking again, this time from pure adrenaline crash. But it worked. The bluff worked. Aggression beats hesitation. Every time. That was a lesson from his force recon days. In a close-quarters fight, the person who commits first usually wins. Doesn't matter if you're outgunned or outsized, violence of action creates shock, and shock creates opportunity. The mountain lion hadn't expected its prey to attack. That split second of confusion was enough. Jack allowed himself 30 seconds to recover, then forced himself to focus on the next problem. He'd just used up a massive amount of energy he couldn't afford to lose. His core temperature, which had been dropping steadily, was now plummeting. The shivering came back worse than before, full-body tremors that rattled his teeth together. Shelter. Now. Jack crawled back into his grass and driftwood nest, pulling the dried vegetation over himself in layers. He buried his face in his arms to create a small dead-air space where his breath could warm the immediate area around his face. The temperature was probably 38 degrees now, and still dropping. In the desert, night temperatures could fall 40 degrees from the day's high. Jack's wet clothes, despite being wrung out, were still pulling heat from his body. Think, what else can you do? He couldn't build a fire. He couldn't get dry. He couldn't call for help. But he could reduce heat loss. Jack started packing the dried grass and small debris around his body, insulating himself from the ground. Sandstone was a heat sink, pulling warmth directly through conduction. By creating a barrier, even a thin one, he could slow the transfer. He also adjusted his position, going fully fetal, knees to chest, arms wrapped around his legs, head tucked down. Minimum surface area, maximum heat retention. Then he started doing isometric exercises, tensing his muscles without moving, squeezing his legs together, contracting his core, clenching his fists. Each contraction generated small amounts of heat through metabolic activity. It wasn't much, but in a survival situation, every fraction of a degree mattered. 10 seconds of tension, 10 seconds of rest. Repeat. The shivering continued, but Jack knew this was actually good. Shivering was the body's furnace, muscle contractions generating heat. As long as he was shivering, his core temperature hadn't dropped below 95 degrees. When the shivering stops, that's when you're dying. But Jack had one other option. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the canyon floor, Jack saw something that made his heart rate spike. Downstream, about 30 yards, partially buried in mud and debris, a flash of bright blue fabric. A backpack. Not his, the color was wrong. But someone else's pack. Probably torn from another hiker during the flash flood. Maybe from weeks ago, maybe from yesterday. If there was gear inside. Jack stood slowly, every muscle protesting. He had to get to that pack. It might contain a water filter, a first aid kit, maybe even a way to signal for help. But between him and that pack was 20 yards of slick, debris-covered canyon floor, pools of standing water, an unstable footing that could send him right back into the current if he slipped. With cracked ribs and compromised balance, one fall could be the end. Jack looked at the pack, looked at the treacherous path, looked at his empty hands. Fortune favors the bold, or kills them. Only one way to find out. He took the first step. Chapter 3. The equipment cache that changes everything. Day 2. 0630 hours. Jack moved like he was crossing a minefield. Every step deliberate. Every weight transfer tested before committing. The canyon floor was a chaos of smooth river rock, jagged sandstone fragments, and slick mud that had the consistency of grease. His boots, still damp from yesterday, had zero traction. 3 steps in, his left foot slipped sideways. Jack windmilled his arms, core screaming as his ribs flexed, and barely caught himself against a boulder. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Another mantra from his tactical training. Rushing got you killed. Precision kept you alive. He continued forward, using his hands for balance, sometimes crawling on all fours when the footing got too uncertain. The blue backpack was clearly visible now, a modern ultralight pack, the kind serious hikers used. It was wedged between 2 rocks, half submerged in a pool of muddy water. 20 yards became 15. 15 became 10. Jack's mouth was so dry his tongue felt swollen. The thought of what might be in that pack, a water bottle, even an empty one he could fill and attempt to purify, pushed him forward. 5 yards. He reached the pool. The water was maybe 2 feet deep, opaque with suspended sediment. The pack was just beyond, tantalizingly close. Jack tested the water's depth with his foot. The bottom was solid, more smooth river rock. He stepped in, the cold water filling his boots instantly. Waded forward. Grabbed the pack. It was heavy. Something's inside. He pulled, but the pack was stuck. The shoulder strap was wedged beneath a rock, held tight by the force of the flood. Jack braced himself and pulled harder. The rock shifted. Not much, just an inch, but enough to free the pack and send a chain reaction through the debris pile. Two more rocks tumbled free. The pool's water level dropped suddenly as a new drainage path opened. And then Jack heard it, a cracking sound from upstream. He looked up just in time to see a refrigerator-sized boulder that had been precariously balanced on the canyon wall break free. It fell in slow motion. No, that was just perception. Actually fell in 2 seconds flat. Jack dove. The boulder hit where he'd been standing, exploding into the pool with a detonation of water and rock fragments. Shrapnel peppered Jack's back, small stones, but moving fast. He felt one open a cut on his left shoulder blade. Then silence. Jack lay face down in 6 inches of water, the pack clutched to his chest, breathing hard. His ribs were on fire. Blood from the new cut was mixing with the water around him. You're losing too much blood. You're making too many mistakes. But he had the pack. Jack crawled out of the pool back toward his alcove, dragging the pack behind him. It took 5 minutes to cover the same distance he'd crossed in 3 minutes going out. When he finally collapsed back into his shelter, he allowed himself exactly 10 seconds to rest. Then he opened the pack. Let me pause here and talk about what Jack's about to do, because how you assess and prioritize found resources can mean the difference between survival and death. The survival value assessment. When you acquire new gear in a survival situation, you need to immediately categorize items by survival priority. Tier 1. Immediate life threat. Items that address your most urgent need. Hypothermia, bleeding, dehydration. Tier 2. Near-term survival. Items that extend your survival timeline. Shelter materials, signaling devices, tools. Tier 3. Long-term sustainability. Items for multi-day survival. Food, advanced first aid, navigation tools. Tier 4. Comfort/morale. Items that don't directly impact survival, but help mental state. The mistake people make. They get excited about good items, like a knife or a multi-tool, and ignore critical needs. If you're bleeding out, a knife doesn't help. If you're hypothermic, food doesn't matter. Jack's current priorities. Water, dehydration timeline, 24 hours. Wound care, infection timeline, 48 to 72 hours. Warmth/shelter. He survived one night, but barely. Signaling. Rescue could come anytime. Navigation. Escaping the canyon. Now let's see what he found. Night 1. 2300 hours. Time became fluid. Jack drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep. More like a fugue state where consciousness flickered like a bad connection. His body was trying to conserve energy by shutting down non-essential systems. He dreamed in fragments. Camp Lejeune. The obstacle course. His instructor screaming in his face. Pain is just information, Parker. Your body's telling you you're alive. Now move. Kandahar Province. A night patrol gone wrong. Pinned down in a grape field with no air support. His team leader's voice. We don't quit. We don't stop. We adapt and overcome. His ex-wife's face. The divorce papers. Her words. You can't turn everything into a mission, Jack. Some things you can't fix by just being tougher. He jolted awake. The canyon was silent. The flood had subsided. Not completely, but the roar had dropped to a steady rush. Jack looked at the sky through the narrow gap between canyon walls. Stars. Thousands of them. Sharp and cold. He checked his mental state. Foggy, but functional. Checked his body. Shivering had slowed. That could be good, warming up, or bad. Stage 2 hypothermia. Jack forced himself to do a field cognitive test. What's your name? Jack Parker. Where are you? Utah. San Rafael Swell. Slot Canyon. What day is it? Saturday. No. Sunday now? Past midnight. What's 7 times 8? 56. His brain was working. Slower than normal, but working. You're still in the fight. He stayed awake the rest of the night, doing isometric exercises every 15 minutes, talking to himself to stay alert, reciting Marine Corps cadences in his head. I don't know, but I've been told. Eskimo pussy is mighty cold. Feels good. Feels good. Marine Corps. Marine Corps. The crude lyrics kept him focused, kept his mind from drifting into the warm, comfortable fog that preceded hypothermia death. Day 2. 0600 hours. Dawn came slowly to the slot canyon. The sun had to climb high enough to send light down into the depths. Jack saw the canyon walls shift from black to gray to amber. He was still alive. His body felt like it had been hit by a truck. then backed over for good measure. The ribs were worse, probably swollen, definitely angry. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but was crusted over with dried blood and dirt. His lips were cracked. His throat felt like sandpaper. Water. I need water. Ironically, he was surrounded by it. The flood had left pools in every depression, puddles on every ledge. But it was all contaminated mud, debris, animal waste, bacteria, giardia, E. coli, and a dozen other things that would have him shitting himself to death within 48 hours. Untreated water was a slow death sentence, but dehydration was a faster one. Jack had maybe 24 hours before dehydration started shutting down his kidneys. In this environment, dry desert air, exertion, stress, he was losing water constantly through respiration and what little sweating his dehydrated body could still manage. Risk assessment. Drink contaminated water and maybe get sick in 2 days, or don't drink and definitely die today. The choice was obvious. Day 2, 1600 hours. The solar disinfected water tasted like victory. Jack drank half the Nalgene in one long pull, lukewarm, slightly cloudy. His body absorbed it like desert absorbs rain. The fog lifted. His mouth produced saliva again. His headache receded. He refilled the bottle and set it back in the sun. 6 more hours, another liter. In the meantime, he needed to plan. He pulled out the destroyed trail map. Most of the ink had run, but he could remember the route. Before the flood, he'd been in the northern section of the San Rafael Swell, following a canyon system that eventually opened into a broader valley. A dirt road, about 4 miles from the canyon mouth. Flash floods move you downstream. He was further in than his original campsite. Going back upstream meant climbing against terrain, possibly hitting more obstacles. Continuing downstream meant following the water, which by definition had to lead somewhere lower. Water flows downhill. Always. Downstream it was. Day 3, 05:45 hours. Jack woke before dawn. Deep darkness at the bottom of a slot canyon. But he'd prepared. Last night, 2 hours on the lighter. Disassembled. Dried every component with the fleece. Blown out the fuel chamber. Left it near his body heat all night. At 0400, he'd tested it. Click. Click. Click spark. 20 minutes of coaxing later, a small fire. Smoky. Barely heat. But burning. He heated water in the Nalgene, warmed his hands, and felt the shift inside his chest. I made fire. I'm in control. He packed everything light. Bivy as a poncho. Rainfly on his belt. Nalgene full. Knife in pocket. Whistle around his neck. Poles as walking sticks. Fresh ointment on the wounds. 2 more ibuprofen. Time to move. Day 3. 0630 hours. 2 hours of steady movement. The canyon twisted like a serpent, opening every quarter mile for a glimpse of sky, then narrowing again. Jack moved deliberately, testing footing, scanning for hazards, exits, threats. The walls were getting lower. The floor was widening. Good signs. He was approaching the mouth. Then he rounded a bend and stopped. Box Canyon. A sheer wall, 80 feet high, water trickling down from a spring above. A dark pool at the base. Dead end. Jack circled the pool, thinking. Water doesn't just accumulate. It goes somewhere. He found the outlet on the far side, a narrow slot, 3 feet wide, completely submerged for at least 15 feet. A sump. He stood at the edge, looking into black water. This is insane. You could drown. But going back meant 2 hours upstream. Then another route that might also dead end. Fortune favors the bold. He sealed everything critical in the waterproof stuff sack, tied it to his belt, cached the poles, kept only the knife, whistle, and empty Nalgene for flotation. 3 deep breaths. Sealed his lips. And dove. Day 3. 0850 hours. Shockingly cold. Jack kicked hard, pulling himself through the submerged slot. Complete darkness, cold, pressure, lungs burning. 5 seconds. 10. 15. 20. Turn back. Now. But there, ahead, a slight lightening. Not much. Enough. 3 more pulls. 2 more. He burst through the surface, gasping, coughing, treading water on the other side. The canyon continued, wider now, walls only 40 feet high. He pulled himself out and lay on the sandstone, breathing, every rib on fire, blood trickling from his forehead again. But he was through. Day 3, 1100 hours. The canyon opened. Gradually, over the next mile. Slot to 20 feet, 50, 100. Walls lowered. Vegetation appeared, juniper, sage, grass. Then a fence line. Barbed wire between wooden posts. Property. Access. Civilization. Jack followed it half a mile until he found a dirt road, 2 tire tracks and sand, barely maintained, but human-made. He stood in the middle of that road and let himself feel it. You did it. You survived. Then he heard the engine. A white pickup appeared over a rise. A man in his 60s, weathered, leaned out the window. You all right, son? Jack looked down at himself. Dried blood, mud, torn clothes, makeshift bandage, empty Nalgene bottle. Flash flood. 2 days ago. Slot Canyon, about 3 miles back. The man's eyes widened. Jesus. Get in. Jack climbed in. As the truck turned toward the highway, the man glanced at him. Ex-military. Marine Corps. Force Recon. The man shook his head. Thought so. No one else walks out of something like that on their own. Jack didn't respond. He watched the canyon system disappear behind them. The red walls, the twisted passages, the slot that had nearly killed him. Preparation is a mindset. Survival is a tactic. Epilogue. 72 hours later. Hospital in Moab. 3 cracked ribs. 12 stitches in his forehead. 5 in his shoulder. Severe dehydration corrected. Minor infection, antibiotics prescribed. A park ranger sat across from him, closing his notebook. Mr. Parker, the statistical survival rate for someone caught in a flash flood of that magnitude, in a slot canyon, is less than 5%. Jack met his eyes. I'm aware. The ranger studied him a moment longer. Remarkable. After he left, Jack sat alone, looking out the window at the red rock formations in the distance. Preparation is a mindset. Survival is a tactic. And sometimes, when everything is stripped away, tactics are all you have. Sometimes that's enough.
Bryce National Park. And we're at Bryce Point. Check this out. Looks like where the Dead Sea Scrolls are found. Kind of looks like that at least. Look how huge. Kind of like the Grand Canyon, but the way it's eroded is beautiful.